Let's try to refurbish this rather than replace it and save $200 while we're at it. In this episode of Aston1936.com, I'm going to show you how to refurbish and repair the windscreen washer fluid reservoir tank. In a recent episode, you've seen me dig into this front fender well and replace my tank because I had a water leak. Every time I filled up the washer fluid, it would come pouring out on my foot. Now, I knew for sure that I had a crack in the top of my tank, that I'd seen it before, but there's a lot of reason this tank could leak. There's seals, rubber bungs, hose connections, the pump bodies themselves. So I'm actually going to go through the whole process of refurbishing the tank. So even if yours doesn't have a crack in it, you might be able to pick up a pointer on how you can fix some other aspect of the tank. So let's get started. Well, let's get started by stripping down the tank. It has a bunch of bits attached to it that I want to take out. So we're just going to use a couple screwdrivers here, but first thing I want to do is remove the pump. So this is the Headlight washer pump, and all you need to do is just prise up gently. Now this has about a 1.5 or 2 inch spigot that sticks down, and I'm just kind of having to work it up gently. And out it comes. Next up, we're going to rotate the headlight, or this is the windscreen washer pump. Same deal. I'm just going to pry it up a little bit out of the socket and set that aside. On the side here on the DB9, we've got the fluid level sensor, and it actually just prizes out as well. You just have to be gentle. You want to bring it straight out. And it came out with its rubber bung, but I'll just pull that off again so you can see how that. So basically the sensor's plastic, but there's a rubber bung that would be, might be left behind. And the rubber bung is keyed to this little molded piece of the plastic here. And there's actually a keyed portion on the actual sensor. So basically the white part flaps down. And that would be sealed through there. So we've now exposed 3 real potential leak spots. If your rubber gets perished on these things, or something's going on, you might not have a leak in your tank. You might actually have a leak between the device and the rubber bung. So your bungs might get perished. The good news is you can order these from Aston Martin separately. They're only like $5, and you know, if the bung is where the leak is coming from, just get a fresh one that's going to be softer rubber, that's supple and works properly again. Or it could be that you've actually got a leak that's the pump body, you know, like something's cracked in the pump, or the fittings, or you know, these are just made out of plastic. Well, also good news is you can just order the level sensor or either of the pumps separately. So you don't have to buy the whole tank assembly to get just one of the pieces if you have an individual component fail. But let's go ahead now and get these rubber bungs out. So I'm going to use my narrow screwdriver, and I'm just going to work. I don't want to tear it. I just want to basically get in and prise it out. So that's the rubber bung for the headlight washer. And now this one is for the, here's the broader tip. What surprised me about this one is that this is a screen and filter, and it's really long all at once. And even so I can imagine if you've had a lot of crud in the bottom of your tank like I did, and you don't get any, you hear the pump running, but you don't get any fluid spraying up on the windshield, all these little perforated holes in here could just be plugged up with garbage, and all you'd have to do is you wouldn't even have to remove the tank. You could just basically get in, pop this rubber bung out, give it a good clean, maybe with a toothbrush, compressed air, get rid of all this crusty crap, and then pop it back in, and you'll probably be right back in service. If it was really perished, you could always order a new one. And then we just need to pop out this side one. So now that we have it stripped down, let's take it over to the sink, and I'm going to show you how to clean up the outside. All right, we're over at the sink, and first thing I want to do is I want to scrub all the 15 years of grime that it's accumulated on the outside of the tank off. Does this make the car go any faster? No, but it will make me happier. One of the solutions I'm going to use on the outside is called Grime Reaper. It's from Chemical Guys. It's just basically a strong degreaser. It's very basic though. So I'm going to glove up just to protect my hands a little bit from it. And we're going to basically spray down the outside, either using the 409 Grime Reaper, and I'm going to use a collection of my scrubby tools, the scouring pad, the toothbrush, and my nail brush, and I'm going to get into the nooks and crannies and see how clean I can get the outside first before I go after the crud on the inside. So let's get started. Well, that's just one of the 6 sides, but you can see that's doing a great job. It's pretty much lifted all the crusted crud off the outside. Maybe a little bit more work to do in a few of the nooks and crannies. I've got a little overspray of red paint on my tank from the recent respray. But you get the idea. Just continue to go at it and go around the whole tank. And I'll show you what the results look like when I'm finished up. So after about 5 or 10 minutes of scrubbing away, the outside of the tank's looking pretty good, other than my dirty hands have smeared it up a bit again, but basically it came back looking pretty nice. I could see I had a crack in the flange where it came off the car, but didn't seem to be detracting from its functionality. So the outside's shiny now, and there's my crack on the inside that we're going to be trying to epoxy up in a while. But next up, I want to deal with this crap on the inside. I'm worried that all this stuff gets down to the bottom. As you saw when I did the tank switch in the other video, when we flipped this over and drained it out, tons of crud had built up in the bottom, and that filter was almost all completely clogged. So I want to try and do something about getting rid of the garbage on the inside. So to do that, I've watched a bunch of YouTube videos, and surprisingly, there's a lot of people doing something to try and clean their plastic tanks. Well, we have to bung up the holes to start with. So here's where I'm using those rubber bungs to seal up the openings, because we're going to put some stuff on the inside of the tank. So I want these in pretty nice and snug so they don't leak. And then we're going to do some weird stuff. We're going to basically put some water in here, and because we're going to want to slosh it around. So I'm only going to put maybe, the bottom 3 or 4 inches worth of, I'm going to put some hot water in here. That feels like enough. So then I'm going to try to squish in this dishwasher soap pellet, and I may have to tear it and just make a mess while I'm doing that. Wow, these are pretty hardy. All right, so there's the dishwasher soap in. And the reason we're using dishwasher soap is because it's formulated not to not get foamy. So it's going to go in as the cleaning agent. And then the thing that everyone goes, what the hell are you doing? We're going to put about a cup of rice in. Well, the rice is going in to act as a scouring pad. We're not cooking the rice. We're not doing anything else with it. We're basically going to pour the rice in so it can basically, all the sharp edges of the grains of rice will scratch away on the edges of the plastic. All right, so then I'm going to put a stopper in the top. And now the exciting part. You're going to be the agitator. You're the dishwasher. So you're going to sit here for about 5 minutes shaking this around. Now I'm going to have a leak, so where the crack was. But basically it's just, you can hear the rice in there like a castanet, you know, shaking back and forth. You want to just, every direction, you know, and just keep at it for about 5 minutes, and then we'll come back and see how it turned out and what comes out at the end. All right, that's been about 5 minutes. As I've been doing it, I've definitely seen the amount of black crud that I can see through the plastic diminishing. So let's, I'm going to use a rag, so I don't want the rice to go down the drain. I'm going to use the rag as a screen. I'm just sticking that in the drain. And let's see what we get that comes out. Ugh. Well, that's not clean water. I'm going to put some fresh water in as a rinse. Now you're going to need to make sure you get all the rice out, and so you may have to rinse it, you know, 3 or 4 or 5 times, whatever it takes, till you're convinced there's no kernels of rice left rolling around in the bottom. But I can already tell you, peering in the top, that it is vastly cleaner. So in about 10 minutes, 15 minutes, I've been able to clean the outside of the tank and pretty much decrud the inside of the tank of all the chunks and lumps. I mean, it's great in there, other than these sort of long-term stains that are in the top. So I'm going to go after those next, because it's me, and I want to see just how clean I can make it. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to add OxyClean. And now this is essentially a bleach derivative, and I'm going to basically fill the entire tank up with water. So I'm going to partially fill it with water now. And I'm just going to cut the corner off my Ziploc bag. And so this is about 2 scoops of OxyClean, which I had to steal from my sweetie's stash of OxyClean at home. Yet further endearing myself to my sweetie. All right, OxyClean installed. Now I'm going to top the tank up all the way. Because what we're going to do is we're going to let this sit. I'm going to let it sit overnight, and we'll see what, essentially the bleaches and everything are going to go after that black stuff and kill off any last algae or anything else that might be in the tank. And with luck, we'll have a pretty much completely clean white tank in the morning. All right, so I've tipped it up to try and get all the air pockets out. I'm going to stopper it again. Now on my car I have the crack, so I'm just going to set it so that the crack is at the top. Hopefully it'll hold the most fluid possible in this particular area. But we'll just leave this sitting here now and let it soak overnight and see what's left in the morning. Well, that's been soaking overnight, and I can already tell by looking through the plastic, the OxiClean has done its job entirely. There's no black streaking of any growth at all on the inside anymore. Let's go ahead and drain it out. And pull a plug on the bottom to make this go a little faster. So if we have a real good look at that now, that bottle looks brand new, or at least as good as I want it to look. It's completely clean. The crack is pretty darn clean up here as well, and you can't really see in the bottom of the unit, but it's clean. Now we need to make sure we don't have any piled up OxiClean in there, so I'd suggest you do a couple of partial fills and then slosh it around just until you're sure by looking in the holes that there's absolutely no residue left from the OxiClean. We don't want to be pumping that around in the rest of the car. The bottle's cleaned up, but next I wanted to turn my attention to the rubber parts. Now you might want to inspect each of these to see if they're perished. If the rubber is brittle or has no flex left to it, it's probably best just to check out my blog and go and buy a replacement for a few bucks each. But mine are still pretty squishy. I think these are serviceable. So I'm going to give them a clean up with a toothbrush. And of particular interest is this, the one that's for the windscreen washer fluid. It's got all these little perforated holes in it. So I'm going to make sure I work those holes and make sure I get them all clean. I'm also going to wash up the pumps and the level sensor. So we'll probably do a little bit of this in fast forward and stop when it's interesting. So basically the toothbrush has done a really good job getting the perforations cleaned out. And you might have seen me blowing backwards through it just to run a little air through it to blow them out, blow out any debris. You could do that with a little bit of compressed air. Don't forget the bottom also has perforated holes, so make sure you give that a scrub. But yeah, it came right back. That one came back nice. You can see the gloss even on the plastic from the factory still. So working well. This one turned out pretty darn good as well. Sensor turned out really good looking as well. All the debris just seems to come right off. Pump cleaned up pretty well as well. Now this has this O-ring on the tip. Pulling that off, that's looking a little perished. That's going to need replaced. All right, and that's the headlight washer pump. So I'm going to give these things time to dry. Next up, we're actually going to try and tackle the repair of the crack. So I know that's going to need to be dry when I do that. So I'm just going to let these sit for a few hours and dry up here in the shop. And then we'll get on with fixing it. Well, now that the bottle's clean and the crack is all dry, I'm going to go ahead and try and tackle actually patching it up. Your crack might not be in the same place, might be different, so you may have to improvise your tools a little bit differently from me, but I've got a drill index, I've got the Gorilla Glue epoxy stick that I'm going to use to fill the crack, some gloves, and maybe some things for using with the epoxy. And then, as I mentioned at the beginning, I've got a Dremel here with basically a routing bit on it, a little ball type bit. That I'm going to use to kind of gouge out the crack. So just use whatever tools you might need to get your job done. So the first step, is you need to stop the crack from propagating. And the way you stop a crack from propagating is you figure out where the very end of it is, and you drill a round hole. And that will de-stress the end of the crack and stop it from spreading. So mine's been like this for 7 years. I don't think it's going to spread much more, but I'm still going to do a quick hole. So just use a drill bit that's appropriate. You don't want to use a teeny tiny drill bit. You want to make a little bit decent sized one. And you're going to drill all the way through to take the stress out of the crack. All right, so that crack will no longer propagate that direction. And here my crack's coming up on an angle and is kind of almost to the ridge there, so I'm just going to set this so I can see it. So I've got basically a hole in there now. Stop the crack from spreading that way. And close up, I've got a hole in there to stop the crack from spreading that way. So now that we've got the crack, the ends dealt with, I'm going to use a Dremel to open up the crack a little bit. I'm not going to go all the way through the plastic the whole way, but you don't want to basically have a fine line because there's no place really for the epoxy putty to get into. So I'm just going to use this and I'm going to grind my way along essentially to make a little trough and roughen things up. So I'm going to freeform this and see what happens. So it doesn't take much. Basically, we can just see in here where I've now got a little bit of a trough all the way along in the crack, and that's where I'm going to basically squish the putty into. I think I'm just going to grab a little file and just clean that up a little bit. So I just grabbed my round file. I'm just going to take the little bits, the burrs off that the Dremel created. Doesn't have to be perfect, you just don't want anything that'll block the epoxy from getting into the crack, wherever the crack is on your bottle. All right, so now I can basically see I've got a nice groove that I'm going to be able to stick the epoxy into and just fill this whole sort of pathway up. So let's get mixing some epoxy. So I've got some general all-purpose Gorilla brand epoxy putty. As I mentioned before, I don't think the brand is going to matter all that much. So you'll want to read the instructions on the back. It takes about 10 minutes to set, 24 hours to cure. You need to be in, wow, works in any temperature range. So for best results, roughen the surface with sandpaper before applying. Well, I think the Dremel and the tip should have done the trick. Make sure it's clean and free of grease, oil, and other loose particles, while the compressed air and the OxyClean bath take care of that. Cut off the desired amount of epoxy. Well, we're just going to need a small amount. Mix by kneading the putty until it's a uniform color for about 30 to 60 seconds. Apply firmly, pressing to the project surface within 5 minutes of mixing. So pretty straightforward.
Cardboard. Aha.
So we just need a small amount. Unwrap it. So it basically just says to knead it till it's a uniform color. All right, so. All right, well that's pretty uniform in color now. It's way more than I'm gonna need. So I'm just gonna experiment here and tear off a little piece of it. And now I'm gonna just try and work it into the hole. So I'm pressing it down, and so I'm making sure I get it into the crack. So it's never going to look perfect, and I'm okay with that, but it will hopefully be all patched up.
You still have to get the cables through there, don't you?
Yeah. So I'm packing it down into the crack. So I'm pretty sure I've got the crack filled up now. I'm going to do a little cleanup of the areas that I know that don't have. I think I have that pressed pretty well in all the way along. The crack's completely full. And I think I'm going to leave it about like that. So the instructions say that within about 5 minutes it's set, and it needs to sit for 24 hours before it's completely dry. It's not the most beautiful looking thing in the world, but we'll actually test out if it's watertight after it's had a chance to set up. All right, well, while that epoxy sets up, let's go ahead and test out our pumps and our level sensors. First, let's start with the level sensor. It's basically just got a magnetic sensor on a float. This one's pretty easy to test if you have a simple voltmeter that can do continuity. What I'm going to do is there's a couple of pins deep in the, it's basically just 2 contacts in there, and I can't quite get at them with the tips of my probes and hold it together for video. So I'm just clipping on with a pair of jumper leads, and then we'll just see if we have basically it's going to work as an open or closed switch detector. Working perfectly. When the float is up and there's fluid in the container, the circuit should be closed and current should flow through it. When the fluid level gets too low, the contact senses it's open and the switch goes to an open, no current flows position. So that's easy to test, and the switch is in great condition. All right, so let's put that aside. So then here we have the washer pump. This is for the windscreen fluid. and I want to test that it's working. This is really a Ford part, and I'm going to try and track down the Ford replacement part. Maybe we can find this off of Amazon or the internet somewhere for a lot cheaper than the Aston dealer, but check out the Aston1936.com companion blog article for stuff like that. So to test this, again, all I need to do is I've got a battery over here with 12 volts, and I just want to connect it to the two terminals. To do that, though, and do it on camera, I have a couple of crimped on spade connectors on a little piece of wire. You can do it with just a couple of jumper wires because you don't have to do it on camera. And I'm going to, so this is a DC pump. It'll run in one direction or the other. It doesn't really matter which way I connect up. It'll be running in reverse. If I have it backwards, and it won't pump any water, so I'm just paying attention to that. So first off, so that's all there is to it to make it run, but I actually want to see it pump water. Because if you're suspecting your, Mr. Cameraman's probably going to have to get up over top here to see it. But I'm going to stick the intake into the water, and then it should blast out water like crazy if I have this spinning the right direction. So that's pumping along, and if I put my fingertip over it, it should develop some pressure. So it's blasting out, and so I'd say that's working pretty good, but for a sense of scale for yourself, now you know how hard at least this pump that was working should be able to throw water. So now the headlight washer pump, it's also a Ford unit. It's a little bigger. Same thing, it has two pins down inside. So I'm probably going to change the way I jumper here a little bit, get these connected already. I don't know if this is going to have more pressure or less pressure, but we'll see here. Wow. There we go, it's all primed. It's actually throwing a heck of a lot of water. That thing is like a sewage pump. All right, so that pump's working well. Now there is a little bit more to service on this one. On the end here, this is where the quick connect coupler was. There's an O-ring fitting, and I'm just using a small pick. And this O-ring on mine is pretty perished. I can actually see little nicks and dimples in it. It's been in the car for 15 years. So it was leaking some around there. Well, you don't have to buy a new pump. O-ring's a pretty standard item. So what I did, and since this is a Ford, I expected this to be a standard unit O-ring. And what I found when I measured this out is that this is a 1/2 inch OD by 3/8 inch ID by 1/16 of an inch diameter O-ring. And on the good news side, if you pick up almost any O-ring assortment kit, that is a standard size. 3/8 by 1/2 by 1/16. And I have one of those here. So basically it's just a direct replacement. There's all sorts of different materials you can get O-rings in, green ones, black ones. These green ones seem to be the higher end stuff. This is just gonna have water in it. So pretty much any O-ring that you can track down will do the trick. So a fresh O-ring in there should seal that up and make it ready for service. As you already saw over at the sink, I've cleaned up all three of the rubber connectors, so now it's time to put this thing back together. First up then, I'm going to want to get my rubber bungs back into the holes. You could probably put a little silicone lubricant on if you wanted. I'm going to try to see if I can get these just to fit dry so that all right, that one's in. Now our little filter screen one. Again, there's no right or wrong way for this one to go back in. Just making sure I've got it seated all the way flush in the bottom. And the O-ring for the sensor. Now this does have a correct position. There's a ledge there, and there's a taper flat port to the O-ring, so that needs to line up. Pretty easy though. So now that's all lined up. And now we need to put our sensors in. So the level sensor, you want the float to hang down when it's empty. Just wiggle it firmly into place. When it sits up nice and flush. Then the windscreen washer pump. Just start going in and then rotate it around. It'll sit in that position, although while you're getting your hose connected again in the future, you know, you might rotate it out. And then the headlight washer pump. Get it started. Push it down, rotate it into place. All right, so it's reassembled. And next up, let's head over to the sink and let's see if my now dry epoxy has sealed up the leak and it's ready to go back into service. Well, with the epoxy all dry and our pumps tested and our rubber seals all reinstalled and the sensors reinstalled, now it's really time to see if it holds water. So I'm going to fill it up and see if my repair up here is dry as a bone. So let's do a little filling. All right, now we're losing water out the pumps because they're just bleeding through. But what I'm really interested in is rolling it over and looking to see if I leak it all. Here. And it's bone dry, other than the splashes of me filling it up. So the epoxy is holding well because we cut the groove in there. Everything's all sealed up. Well, I think this worked out pretty well. For probably less than $40 worth of supplies and an hour's worth of time over a couple of evenings, I've managed to completely refurbish the washer tank and pump system. If you've just had a small component of your system go out, hopefully the knowledge of how to service it was included in this video. Down here you'll find a link to the companion blog article. We'll have links to the pumps and the seals in case you need to purchase those for your own car. Up here I'll probably have a video that shows you how to reinstall the washer tank. If you like videos like these, please subscribe. And as always, I love to hear your comments. Please leave those down below. Thanks for watching.